This is Paul Allen, who played in the Intercounty Baseball League, which is Canada's oldest baseball league, uh, for what, 8 years? Did I get that right?
Yeah, yeah, nine, eight with one team, and then 1 year with the Brantford Red Sox.
Okay, great. And he has written a book about the league and the number of Negro League stars who, as baseball integrated, the older guys migrated to the two other leagues, and what made the Intercounty League attractive. And I did a little research, there's over 20 players that made the major leagues from them, including uh, Ferguson Jenkins, Denny McLean, Jesse Orozco, Chris Spire, and a few other guys. So let me turn it over to Paul, and you tell us
Okay,
what
great.
you've written
Thank
about.
you. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I obviously wrote this book, Bright Lights, Black Stars, and I can tell you that the reason I wrote it had to do with a couple of coaches that I had as a kid, and each one of these men that you see on the picture, Jack Fairs, Joe Bayshard, Willie Casanova, and Bruno Casanova, they all played in the intercounty, and they were exceptional ball players. Bayshard and Fairs did not play pro ball. They turned down offers. Jack Fairs became a professor at the University of Western Ontario, and he was actually my first all-star coach, a real technician. Joe Bayshard became my next coach, and Joe went to Michigan State, played in the intercounty for London, and later became Dr. Bayshard and lectured at Michigan State and some of the satellite campuses. And the other guy was Willie Casanova. Willie did play pro ball and played in the New York Yankee organization, was a great ball player, also starred in the intercounty. And then his brother, Bruno, took over as a coach. Well, those men had a great influence on me. And I think, without them, I probably would never pursued baseball to the level that I could get to. And that Chatham minor baseball coaches and those guys, the Chatham minor baseball, I'll show you a map of where Chatham is, has probably won 60 what we call provincial Ontario Baseball Association championships, which we equivalent to your state championship at the highest level. We played against bigger cities and did real well. My teammates, of course, had a lot to do with my interest in baseball and also wanting to write a little bit about them, but mostly about the intercounty. That's myself up in the top left-hand corner with the big ears, and a guy by the name of Fergie Jenkins right there. He and I were on the same team all the way. There's another picture of him standing there with another pitcher and myself on the right-hand side. And of course, the picture of him in the middle occurred when he signed in 1962 with the Philadelphia Phillies. And I had moved on to another town and was playing intermediate baseball. So, I played in that league in 1963. It's hard to believe. That's 61 years ago, folks. And now the little character there is, except he's got red hair and I got gray hair or white hair. I wrote a book, and I played for London and Brantford. And there's my daughter with the two books. I just wanted to show you that. She was so excited that I got that book done. So she did that. Well, here's my plan on what we're going to do. I'm going to tell you a brief history of baseball, Canada and the United States. I'm going to tell you some of the early Canadians that were connected to Major League Baseball eventually. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this Intercounty Baseball League. I will tell you a little bit of what I call the glory years. And the glory years I consider to be about 1948 to 1959. And that's the time when most of the Negro League players played. And also the teams and the players and the stories are just, it's a wonderful period of time in that baseball. And then I'll tell you some about the long home runs that I saw. First of all, let's start off with a terrific book. Hey, folks, I want you to buy my book, but this is a good book if you're into the academics of who invented baseball, where was the first game played, what were the rules, by a guy by the name of Brian Chip Martin. He happens to be a Canadian, but he wrote this book about the controversy, like who is it the truth or is it just an exciting lie? And I won't go into details about it, but it is a really good academic book with lots of citations on where the first games were played. I just mentioned to Paul a minute ago that I sent my book to a guy in Chicago area to do a review. And I took this from what he wrote on the review and emailed to me. He said, first of all, I didn't know that the first recorded baseball game was actually played in Canada. He didn't know that Babe Ruth hit possibly his first home run in Canada. People know that a priest by the name of Brother Matthias was the man who kind of nurtured and maybe taught the Babe about baseball, but most people might not know he was also a Canadian. There's been hundreds of former Negro League players and Major League players who played baseball in Canada. He didn't know that. My research and some references points that I checked into has maybe 400 Negro League players playing out in the Manitoba Dakota League, and Manitoba is a province. And of course, my own research from the league that I played in, the inter-county baseball, there were 40 former Negro League players, and there's a whole bunch of former Major League players, either on their way to the majors or after the major leagues, like Fergie. Like Fergie obviously had already been in the Baseball Hall of Fame when they convinced him to come back and pitch a couple years in London. Canada's home to the oldest continuously operating league in the world. Labatt Park, home of the London Majors, is the longest continuously played diamond in the world. They have played baseball on that diamond since 1877. Here's another interesting thing. A Canadian by the name of Jack Graney was the first pro player to face Babe Ruth, and he was as a pitcher. And Graney was the first former player to do radio play-by-play for the Cleveland Indians, and these guys were Canadians. Here's another interesting thing. Frank Selkirk, a Canadian, replaced Babe Ruth in center field and wore number 3, which was the Babe's number, until it was retired. And then, of course, there's Tip O'Neill. The Canadian has the second highest batting average in Major League Baseball history. There were early games played in Canada in St. John's, New Brunswick, which is the Maritime Provinces, in 1793. There were teams in Hamilton, Ontario in 1819. And then the claim that Beachville, which is a little town in southwestern Ontario, claims to have had the first recorded baseball game in 1838, 7 years before the New York Knickerbockers played and had Knickerbocker rules. And there was also a game played in Massachusetts, but the Canadians obviously, and it's again, you go back to that book that Chip Martin wrote. You can make your own decisions on that, on where the game was first played. But there were a lot of leagues in Canada, Hamilton, London, and if you refer, yes, sir.
If you're going to get into this later, that's great. But I'm just kind of curious about the Negro League players playing in Canada. Was Canada at the time, was it less prejudicial than the U.S. was?
Yeah, and I'm gonna mention that as we roll along. I just tell you that the early leagues were there, and the thing is that the Canadian, every Negro League player that I researched that had written a book or I found things in the newspaper said, "Oh, Canada, we loved it. People didn't turn their head sideways." And I'm not saying that there wasn't some racial slurs directed at them over the years in the leagues, but compared to what they faced elsewhere, it was minimum. I mean, they could eat in the same restaurants, they could stay in the same hotels. People, respected them as athletes. So it wasn't as difficult for them, and they liked it. The other thing about it is the money was good. A lot of times the Negro League teams and the barnstorming, there was questions about whether they were going to get paid, who was making the money, et cetera, et cetera. And they were assured of a pretty good paycheck there. Tell you about the International Association in 1877. London, Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh Alleghenies, people in Pittsburgh were quite surprised about that. Rochester, New York, Manchester, Columbus, and a team in Guelph, Ontario, near Toronto. And Lynn, Massachusetts, the famous Lynn Live Oaks, all played And I teased the heck out of the Pittsburgh people because I said the championship was won by London. And there's your Labatt Ballpark, world's oldest baseball grounds, confirmed by the Guinness records. This was the first black player to play professional baseball. And the thing that, again, I enjoyed, he threw a two-hitter against the London, Ontario, Canada Tecumsehs back in 1878. And he later became a Hall of Famer. Here are some of the players that played Major League Baseball that most people may not know. Look at Tip O'Neill, hit 492 in 1887, a long time ago, and they adjusted his batting average because at that time they counted walks as hits, but he's still 435 batting average. And then there was a famous guy by the name of Mooney Gibson who came out of London, Ontario, played for the Pirates, won a World Series, and managed the Pirates and the Cubs. And then there's Robert Emsley out of a small town, was 32-17 for the Baltimore Orioles. And there's the picture of Graney. That's on the side of a building in St. Thomas. I did a talk there, and I had no idea who Graney was. Well, let me tell you about the Intercounty Baseball game, and we'll tell you more about the Negro League players. It was formed in 1919, a place called Galt, and over on the right-hand side, Guelph, the bottom left, Kitchener, and the right, Stratford. So here's what we're talking about, folks. This is southwestern Ontario. If you take a look at the map, down at the left-hand side near the bottom is Detroit, Michigan. And if you follow the little yellow line on Lake Erie and swing to the right of the screen, there's Buffalo. So I grew up in Chatham. Now, Chatham is going to have an intercounty baseball league this year. But the teams that I wrote about were London, Brantford, Kitchener, Hamilton, Welland, Guelph, Toronto. And there's another team that has been in the league a couple of years by the name of Barrie. So it gives you an idea of where we were located. The Chatham is going to be a barnstorming team because Chatham at one time was very close to the end of what they call the Underground Railroad, where people that the blacks that fled from just a little bit before and during the Civil War fled north, and therefore there's a kind of a tribute to the black baseball teams that barnstormed and went around and played. That's Labatt Park. This is the first black guy that played for London. He was not a Negro League player. And you asked a question about racism and comfort. Harry was a sprinter and had defeated 2 of the 4 Canadian Olympic athletes to go to the Olympics. And in the wisdom of the Canadian Olympic Track and Field Committee, they said, Harry, you need more training. And I have some black friends that know the history of Harry Coursey, and they felt that was a racial thing that they took the other guys. It was in the Olympics when, if you remember that movie, Chariots of Fire, and Harold Abrams won, and there was criticism of being professional, but that was at that particular time. Here's an interesting story. This is an all-black team from my hometown, and the reason I have a circle around one player is I want to tell you more about this Flat Chase, a great ball player, and because of the color ban at the time in 1934, obviously he never played Major League Baseball. Now, baseball really swings when it comes to integration, probably because of Bob Feller. He did a lot to show that the Negro League players were as good, if not better in some cases, or at least comparable to any of the, quote, white Major League players at the time. Feller was a World War II veteran in the Navy, and he planned and figured, like, how can I promote and how can I make more money? And he was in such demand that he set up a barnstorming tour all over the United States and convinced Satchel Paige to pick the best black players. And that's what they did. And they toured around and they flew, which is something that Major League Baseball had not done. So he leased 2 airplanes for the Bob Feller's All-Stars and Satchel Paige's All-Stars. The thing that I get a kick out of too is Satchel Paige is on the left and Bob Feller is on the right. Look at the look at the kick, and they're almost identical. And the thing that's of interest in the book is that Jeep Jessup and Barney Brown and Max Manning and a guy by the name of Phil Marshall were on these teams. Marshall was with Feller's team, and Brown, Manning, and Jessup were black Negro League players that played on that thing, and they later played in this Intercounty Baseball League. Obviously, Jackie Robinson breaks the color barrier, and I want to tell you a little bit about that. He signed in 1945 and was in Daytona. There's a ballpark here, if you haven't seen it, called Jackie Robinson Ballpark. I'm actually going to be doing a presentation live at the ballpark at the end of March. Well, Robinson, of course, goes to Montreal with AAA. They win the league championship, and he goes on with the Dodgers in 1947. The picture on the right-hand side is Larry Doby, and Doby was the first black to be signed in the American League with the Cleveland Indians by Bill Veeck. So that's the look at Robinson in 46 and the Dodgers in 47. And there is the Jackie Robinson Ballpark. It's the home of the Daytona Tortugas. Great place to go. So here's the 48 to 58 years, and I'm going to tell you about some of those Negro League players, some of the minor pros. There's so many people that I just don't have time, to go through these people. But there's pictures. The guy third to the right is Jimmy Wilkes, a Negro League player who played for the Newark Eagles when they won the Negro League World Series. The guy on the right-hand side is Pat Seary, who played pro ball for the Indians and the Cubs, and actually hit 4 home runs in one game, and one of the very few that did that. This guy right here on the top, underneath this chubby guy on the left-hand side, is Manny McIntyre. He was, we believe, the first black player to sign professional in Canada. So these are some of the players. Tom Parker Jr. Played for the Homestead Grays. Wilmer Harris was a Negro League. Chuck Alini, the catcher, played in the major leagues. Another catcher played pro. The left-hander, Harry Schaefer, pitched for the Yankees. Anyway, it goes on, and you can get more details about each of these players in the book, and I just don't have enough time to go through all of them. But they're really interesting players. Here are some of the major leaguers that played years ago. Frank Coleman on the right-hand side was a pretty good ball player. The Yankees and the Pirates. Harry Fisher, Bill McDonald, Tommy Padden, great ball players. Here, look at this. These are the Homestead Grays who played, either the Homestead Grays or the Pittsburgh Crawfords, who played in that intercounty league. And the guys in red were World War II veterans. Ted Alexander, Sam Bankhead was a phenomenal ball player. Lonnie Blair, Shanny Clifford, Wilmer Fields, Josh Gibson Jr., Ziggy Marcel, Udi Napier, Tom Parker, Bob Thurman, who played for the Cincinnati Reds, played. And actually, Satchel Paige pitched up there. He pitched against Sal Magnin. And there's other Negro League players. Some of them, again, you could get more details. Barney Brown was considered to be as good as Satchel Paige. And Max Manning probably should have played pro ball, but at the time they didn't pick him up. The London team that I played on in the history won 5 championships between 43 and 48. And what happened is the other teams started, how do we compete with London? They seem to win all the time. They actually won the championship in their league. They won the Canadian championship. And then the winners of the amateur championship of the United States and the Canadian champions challenged each other. And the Canadians won in 7 games in an absolutely phenomenal series and beat the Fort Wayne, Indiana General Electrics, a well-known name in baseball. And I mean, they were loaded. They had former major league ball players. But this shows you how good, the Canadian baseball was at the time. Here are a couple of guys that played on that team. Tom Burgess was one of my managers. He played for the Angels and the Cardinals. And then this Russ Evon was a 2-time batter champion. terrific ball player. And people ask me a lot of times, well, how come he didn't play major? People ask me, why didn't these guys play Major League Baseball? The reason that Russ Evon and some other guys who played in this semi-pro league is they were getting paid and they were making more money than they could make in minor league baseball or for the pros. So they just stayed where they were and they just kept playing. Like this guy, Tommy White. He was 25-1, and he was voted the Babe Ruth Award for Canada's outstanding baseball player. 1949 is when it really started with the Negro League players. Up in the quarter is Bill Veeck. Bill Veeck had a lot to do with supporting the black players. And the guy that you see on the left-hand side is Gus Murray. He was the owner of a team called the Galt Terriers, and he was Canada's Bill Veeck. He was a great promoter. The story behind Gus Murray is this is the kind of guy he was. In the opening of the 1949 Intercounty Baseball League season in Galt, he organized a parade. Sorry? I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you very clearly.
Go ahead, I'm going to mute you, okay?
Okay. At any rate, so Gus Murray organized a parade downtown to the ballpark, and at the front of the parade was a guy in a full regalia of native person. At the time we would call them an Indian, a native of someplace with a full headgear, a complete native costume, and he was at the head of the parade. The parade comes in, the guy gets off his horse, runs out to the mound, takes off his headdress, takes off his outer exterior clothes, and is wearing a brand new Galt Terrier pinstripe, just like the New York Yankee uniforms. And then the rest of the players ran out of the field. And this Gus Murray was a terrific promoter. He hooked up with George Selkirk, and Selkirk had retired, had played for the Yankees, was a two-time All-Star, five-time World Series champion, a Canadian, and Selkirk got him players to come to Canada. He picked up Tommy Padden. That's Padden behind Babe Ruth. When Babe played for the Boston Braves, Padden was playing for Pittsburgh. They immediately signed this player, Jeff Shelton. He was the first Negro League player to come to Canada, and he was from Buffalo. He then signed a former Major League player who at one time was third in the batting league of the National League, Goody Rosen. And Goody he was a really great AAA player and a Major League player, but ran amok with Leo DeRocher. And that happens a lot of times. And then this is the guy that took the headdress off. He was a native Cherokee out of Oklahoma, Major League pitcher for the Dodgers, Tommy Warren. And then they had Connie Creedon, who played for the Boston Braves, and a Canadian hockey player who played hockey. And most people claim that this guy probably should have played Major League Baseball, but he was in love with hockey and he played for the Montreal Canadiens, so that was something he did. There's Manny McIntyre. There's Ted Alexander, great Homestead Grays pitcher. There's the first Canadian Major League All-Star, Oscar Judd. The thing that I enjoyed researching is that when Alexander played and pitched against Oscar Judd, the two Major League pitchers, Judd, in the box score, it says hit by pitcher, Judd by Alexander, Alexander by Judd. So they they didn't give up anything to each other. Here's a terrific guy too. This guy played in Newport News for the Baby Dodgers, and his name was Sadi Grote. He played in the Intercounty, but he played 12 seasons of pro baseball. Now this guy was on the same team as Chuck Connors and Gil Hodges, and Sadi Grote was a native from Brantford, Ontario, the Mohawk Reservation, and went to Buffalo and became a lacrosse player and just a great baseball player. And he roomed with Hodges and named his first son Gil after Gil Hodges. I found out that he owned the Naughty Pine restaurant and the Crossroads Inn near Fort Eustis and Interstate 64. And he also coached youth baseball for the Peninsula Catholic team and was coach of the year. He actually played 3 games in Montreal with Jackie Robinson. He was a World War II veteran, won a Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and a Silver Star. And I didn't write a lot about the Newport background, but when you see the names and the players, that must have been a hell of a team, because Chuck Connors, you probably all know, went on to become the rifleman on TV. But he played in the tropics, and he did play, I think, for the Cubs a couple of, quite a few games. Here's an interesting guy. I put Big Mistake in there because you all would remember the Pretty Woman with Julia Roberts walking down the street in that pretty dress and hat. She walks into the store that refused her. They wouldn't sell her any clothes, and she said, "You work on commission, don't you?" She said, "Yeah." She says, "Big mistake, huge." And this guy made a mistake because he bet on hockey, and he landed up in the Intercounty Baseball League owning a team. But he still is the youngest player to score an overtime NHL hockey game. Here's some guys that I want to tell you about real quickly, okay? Wilmer, Shanny, and Freddie. Wilmer Fields, in my opinion, and you can look him up on SABR, there's articles written about him. Wilmer Fields should be in the Baseball Hall of Fame. This guy was the most valuable player, the best player on virtually every team he played on. He played in the tropics. He played in Puerto Rico. He played in Venezuela. He played in Mexico. He came to the Intercounty. He played 51, 53, and 54 and 55, won the batting championship twice, and lost it would have been his third one by 2 points. He led the league in home runs, RBIs. I mean, this guy was phenomenal. He was a big man, and everybody said he was a gentle, kind man, and he was just a phenomenal baseball player. Another guy that played on the same team with him on the Homestead Grace was Shanty Clifford, and Shanty Clifford was quite a ball player, a catcher. And I want to tell you the Frank Cosentino story. You folks would not know who Frank Cosentino is, but Frank Cosentino played professional football and was on several Grey Cup championship teams, which is like your Super Bowl in Canada. And Cosentino was a good ball player, and a couple teams wanted him. And a scout, Dewey Griggs, from the Milwaukee Braves, Atlanta later, wanted to see Frank pitch. So he said, "Come on out early to the game, and you can throw to Shanny, and Shanny will appraise you, and I'll look at you." So Shanny gets behind the bullpen home plate, and Cosentino starts throwing, and Shanny says, "Come on, kid, bring it. Come on, give me something. Throw hard. Let's see what you got." So Frank threw really hard. And when he was telling me the story, he started laughing. He said, because I was a starting pitcher that night, he said, I lasted 2 innings because Shanny was playing on that team and basically, kind of sucked him in to make him throw hard. Here's a terrific ball player by the name of Freddie Thomas. Freddie Thomas was the first Black player to integrate the Eastern League in Wilkes-Barre, Scranton with the Indians. And he was also a great basketball player. He still holds the record for the most career points at the University of Windsor. And Windsor, of course, is right across from Detroit. He played pro football. He played with the Harlem Globetrotters. He played in the Negro Leagues. He played up in the Quebec Provincial League. And then they paid him a lot of money, and he came and played in the Intercounty League and was a batting champion, a terrific ball player. Kitchener and Guelph were also teams in that league. There's the guy I told you about, Pat Siri. On July 8th, 1948, hit 4 home runs in 1 game. They picked up Phil Marshall. And you remember I told you that the black guy had a circle around him with the red circle? And I said he was a really great player. He was a pitcher, a catcher, could do anything, and a great hitter. In the Ontario Championship, intermediate men in 1934, his opponent on the mound was Phil Marshall. Marshall later played for the Philadelphia Athletics and was an all-star, a great pitcher. Flat Chase, the black guy I told you about, beat him 3 times in the championship. And of course, Marshall Dome signs pro, and flat Earl Chase doesn't go. Here's Bobby Deacon, another great ball player. Got injured when George Altman tried to jump over him on a ground ball and broke his back, and he never got back on that. Here's another great ball player that came up to play in the intercounty. If you have heard of him, I don't know. Pete Gray. Pete Gray was a one-arm ball player. He was injured as a youngster, pursued baseball, actually played during the war for the St. Louis Browns. And at one time, before he got up there, he was the most valuable player of the Southern League, and hit like 345. He played up in Intercounty, and a couple of guys told me that the older guys told me, he said his arm was just unbelievably strong. Here's another story. This is Udi Napier, who played for the Pittsburgh Crawford. He's the guy that has a uniform. They found his granddaughter found it in a trunk in an attic in Pittsburgh, and they donated it to the museum there. But this when I say Walt Jeffries, he's another pro ball player that I played against, but he's a lot older than me, 13 years older, and he's 95 now. And he told me a story that he warmed up with Udi Napier, and Napier said, this is the first time in my career that I really don't need a glove because you don't throw hard enough to get anybody out. And there's a couple other Negro League players. Ziggy Marcel actually played for the Harlem Globetrotters, and Leonard Pounding Pig was a Negro League batting champion. There's Jimmy Wilkes. I showed a little picture of him. They called him Seabiscuit. Now, those of you that have been around horse racing would know that Seabiscuit was a smaller racehorse and was very fast. And Jimmy Wilkes was very fast. There's stories about him saying that if Willie Mays and I were in the outfield, you wouldn't need anybody else. Or you could put your right fielder and left fielder along the lines, and Jimmy would take care of everything else. I played against him for 2 years, and he was a lot older, but gosh, he was a great guy. There's Bob Thurman, played for Cincinnati. Here's an interesting story that I uncovered too. In 1952, Hank Aaron had signed with the Indianapolis Clowns, and he played with Jimmy Wilkes. And the scout Dewey Griggs came to a ball game one night, and he said to Jimmy, he says, "Anybody here can play Major League Baseball?" Now remember, this is 1952. This is 6 years after Robinson and Larry Doby and Campanella and Hank Thompson, Monty Irvin are in the majors. And Jimmy says, "Yeah, that kid over there, Hank Aaron." So the owner of the Brantford Red Sox, a semi-pro team I told you that I played on, came to Buffalo and tried to get Hank to sign and come to Brantford because they already had some Negro League players who were older, and they figured, well, it'll mentor this young kid. But what happened is the scout saw him play also, wrote the Braves and said, "Sign this kid right now because we screwed up and we missed out on Willie Mays." And Hank Aaron said in an article I read, if the Giants had given me $50 a month more than the Braves, I would have been in the outfield with Willie Mays. So I got quite a kick out of that. Here's a couple of black players. Jeep Jessup, five-time All-Star in the Negro Leagues. Ed Steele hit home runs in a ballpark called Galt. And they used to call a barn on the other side of the fence Steele's Barn. He is eligible for the Hall of Fame this year on the Veterans Committee. I hope he gets it. Tell you about the blonde Hollywood hurler, Max and Barney, real quickly. Harry Fisher. Harry Fisher played for the Pittsburgh Pirates, but didn't stay very long. The reason being is the Pirates did not know what to do with him. He was a good pitcher, a bit wild, but he was also a good hitter. As an example, 1949, with Double-A New Orleans, he hit .397. In 1950, he hit .423 in 79 games. When he stopped playing pro ball, he came to the Intercounty, and he was runner-up twice to the great Wilmer Fields. He went back and played in pro ball, and he went to Tulsa. He was 32 years old, and he tied for first with the Tulsa Oilers when he hit 19 home runs. And another thing that he did is he hit 3 home runs in one game for Tulsa, and they claimed that he missed the fourth one because he hooked it over the right field wall. But they didn't know what to do with him, and he was wild, so he really didn't stay very long. But he did play for the Hollywood Stars. I don't know whether you folks know a lot about the Hollywood Stars, but that team was that's where it was on the West Coast, because those, the Giants and the Dodgers had not moved out there yet. So the only game in town was, basically AAA baseball, and that was called the Hollywood Stars. The team was actually owned by the Hollywood Stars. It was a great publicity thing. Bob Hope, Groucho Marx, Bing Crosby, Burns, Gracie Allen, Gary Cooper, Gene Autry, Jane Mansfield, Elizabeth Taylor, Bill Holden, Humphrey Bogart, Ginger Rogers, Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Cecil B. DeMille, the director, was actually the chairman. And they promoted this team in the area. And that is a picture of Elizabeth Taylor when she was 17 years old, and she was a Batgirl. I put the picture of Jane Mansfield there on the right-hand side, coaching at third base, probably down in Florida somewhere, because she was Miss Hollywood Stars. So you could land up going to a ball game and sit next to Humphrey Bogart or some of the other stars. And I got a kick out of this because as a ball player, when you're around third base, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to look at your coach. This guy's getting a good look at Jane Mansfield as he goes around the corner. There's Max Manning and Barney Brown. Barney Brown played out in the Dakota League, and the owner of a team there is Jamestown and Bismarck were great rivals. And he phoned up Abe Saperstein, the owner of the Harlem Globetrotters. Abe also was an agent for the Negro League players. And this guy was named Neil Churchill. He said, get me somebody that can beat Barney Brown. And he said, well, let's get Satchel Paige. And the owner of the Bismarck team said, well, he come out and play. He said, Satchel pay anywhere if you pay him enough money. So he went out there, and the story is that these two guys pitched against each other, and they packed the stadiums. They brought in more seats. They booked train cars from Bismarck to Jamestown and Jamestown back to Bismarck for games. And he was a terrific pitcher. He's Hall of Fame eligible also. There's Frank Coleman, I mentioned to you, played for the Yankees and the Pirates. This is one of my favorite chapters, Doc and Johnny. I played with the guy on the left, John Ambrose, and a Negro League player from Philadelphia by the name of Stanley Doc Glenn. They played in Quebec, a pro league, and won the championship. And the St. Thomas Elgin team in the intercounty convinced the pitcher and the catcher to come and play in the intercounty, paid them more money than they were making in pro ball. And those two guys led St. Thomas to back-to-back championship. This is the last Negro League player to come into this league called the Intercounty League in 1959, Larry Cunningham. He played for Memphis. I played against him for 2 years, a lot older, but still pretty good. Let me tell you a couple of taters. There's that black guy, Flat Chase. He hit a home run in Chatham, Ontario. It's now called the Fergie Jenkins Field. When I played there, it was called Rotary Park. But of course, Chatham, honors Fergie. So there's home plate. The short right field fence is probably 279. That's not very far. But the next part, if you follow that arrow over the fence where the running track is a football field. Now, friends, the Canadian football field is longer and wider than the American football field. It's 65 yards wide. American is 55. So do the math, 279 to clear the fence. And then on the outside of the football field was a track with 6 lanes that are 36 inches each. So 6 times 36, blah, 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 180 approximately. And then 50, 65 yards across yards. That's well over 200. And the ball hit the asphalt and rolled in and hit the Chatham Memorial Arena. How far is it? It's got to have gone at least 550 feet. Is that possible? Yes, it is. Because Luke Easter, who later played for the Indians, hit a home run at Offerman Stadium in Buffalo, AAA, that went over the center field scoreboard, landed on the top of the house, and the lady said it felt like an atomic bomb. That was measured at 450. Now, if it had hit the asphalt on the road, that baby would have gone a long way too. So Flat Chase had held long distance home runs in about 5 Southern Ontario. Here's another one. the great Wilmer Fields hit a home run in this ballpark in Galt. There was no fence out in left field. And one of my friends, a guy by the name of Court Heinbach, pitched for Kitchener, saw another guy by the name of Roger DeWally hit a home run, and Court was eating potato chips in the bullpen and ran out and put a rock where the ball hit. And the story is that Wilmer Fields, years before, had hit a home run farther than Roger DeWally. Here is a sample of a Wilmer Fields home run, and then we can just about be done. In 1958, in his declining years, he played for the Mexico City Reds. You see the star in center field deep just before the scoreboard? Fields, right-handed batter, hit a home run straight away center over the scoreboard, cleared the Kanye Fuji, which is a film advertisement, cleared that and landed on the road. And he said in his book, I wish you'd have seen that one, because Mays and Aaron and all those guys played there and never hit one that far. There's a guy that hit one. He never played Negro League, but he played up in the Intercounty, hit it over the fence, over the shrubs, over the little road into the Thames River a long time ago. Now, I'm going to finish up by telling you that I have a chapter on the great pitchers, and I fortunately was able to speak to some elderly former intercounty ball players. Tubby Jones died in his 100th year. I spoke to him a year before he died. Jack Fairs, my coach, died last summer at 97. And then Ronnie Hodera, actually was father Ronnie Hodera, played in 1949. And I talked to these other guys. Another guy that played in London was Mike Kilkenny, who pitched for the Tigers. Quite a great player. So I was able to pick these guys' brains and tell stories about the Intercounty. Ronnie Hodera on the left, and Father Ron Hodera, a Catholic priest for 63 years. I got to talk to him about who he played against in 1949 as a shortstop. He just gave me all types of information. And he said, you know, when you're down my area, and I have a sister-in-law lives in the same towns, come on and see me. I've got scrapbooks. He says, we'll have a beer. I went to Florida last year here, Ormond Beach, and I called him and I recorded the conversation. I came back in June when the book was published. I was speaking at a ballpark, actually my own ballpark, London, and one of the ladies said, did you know that Father Hodera died? And it just broke me up, because he seemed like a really wonderful man, was a great ball player. There's another guy that helped me by the name of Eric McKenzie. He only played one game, one inning in Major League Baseball, but he made history because he was the catcher, and there was a pitcher who pitched for the Kansas City Athletics. And he was from a little place called Kingsville, and he was the first Canadian pitcher and catcher. So I say thank you. In the live presentation, there's a little music that goes with this. And I usually tell people, thank you for having me. Let's think about the people that we admired ahead of us, whether they're sports, baseball, basketball. Mickey's gone. Whitey Ford, Yogi Berra, Stan Musial, Roberto Clemente, all the great people are gone. My mom and dad have passed on. My grandmother, my grandfather, my aunts, my uncles. So let's raise a glass and say, hey, thanks. Like Bob Loeb said, thanks for the memories. And here's another thing that we do. I don't know whether this will do it, but tell me if you can hear it. It probably not. But I say, let's not be sad. Everybody stand up. A lot of times I do talks where there's a bar or a dinner, and I ask everybody stand up, and I ask everybody, say, what is a song that is sung more than any other song in the United States? And everybody says, well, Take Me Out to the Ball Game. No, it's called Happy Birthday. But the second one is Take Me Out to the Ball Game. And I get people singing Take Me Out to the Ball Game, and we finish up. And I say to you, and I'll be glad to answer any questions, that's the book, that's the story. There's much more. You can get it on Amazon. It's gosh, it's 500 pages, and I probably underpriced it, but I wanted people to get the story. And another thing you might be interested in doing is get on your computer and search Bright Lights, Black Stars, because I have been fortunate enough to get terrific articles and reviews of this book. The University of Western Ontario, where I attended College of Education, did an absolutely wonderful article. Jerry Lavari, there's newspaper. I mean, I couldn't ask for anything more. It's been absolutely fantastic. So that's pretty well the story.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Paul. Good presentation.
Thank you.
I'm sure we're going to have several questions. I'm going to ask one that's kind of in the weeds. You kept saying that people made more money in this league than they did in the minor leagues or maybe even the majors. How much money, much more are you talking about? 20%,
Well,
25?
okay, I can, yeah, I do know that because I checked newspapers, and I actually talked. Remember the guy said that the pitcher and the catcher played in the Quebec Provincial League, which was an outlaw league, but paid. It was pro. They were affiliated with the Braves, and they came and played in Canada. And I knew him. He's passed away, but his son played in the league, and he came to one of my book talks. And I said, Neil, did your dad ever tell you how much he made in the 1950, 51, 52, 53 when he came in? He says, yeah. He said he made $500 a month. I'm going to tell you, you go back and do the math on that one. Find out how much $500 is worth in 1950 in today's money. Wilmer Fields, who played in the Intercounty, played 1 year in AAA baseball because Jack Kent Cook, the owner at the time of the Lakers, the Washington Redskins, he was an entrepreneur in sports. He convinced Wilmer that he wanted him to play AAA. So he gave him a major league contract and promised to pay Wilmer's wife, Audrey's, hotel and transportation on away games. And in 1952, Wilmer was paid $14,000. Now, there's another guy in 1952 that played for the New York Giants by the name of Willie Mays. Willie Mays was paid $12,500 in Major League Baseball, and Wilmer Fields made more money than he did. And guess what? When he left, he didn't like like the major league, the pro ball. They tried to change his hitting stance, and he left spring training, and he sent a telegram back to Brantford, and he said, can I play in your league? And they said, yeah. So what happened is he got more money playing in Brantford than he did in minor pro. And a lot of those players did. A lot of those guys left. Freddie Thomas, the black guy that played for Wilkes-Barre Scranton, when he went up to the Quebec League, he left and played the Intercounty. Brantford tried to sign him, and there was a newspaper article with the Kitchener and the Oshawa owners, and they were talking, and they said, what did you pay Freddie? He said, I'm not going to tell you. He said, well, we offered him $650 a month, and he just laughed. He said, so I know you're paying him more than that. And that was, again, back in 1950, 51, 52. So that's what happened. That's what happened, Paul.
We have a follow-up question on that. So where did the cash come from? I mean, small stadium, short season, no TV, I presume.
They packed the ballparks. I did a more of an analytical thing for the Canadian baseball convention. They like academic stuff. So I did a lot of research on what was the impact of the Negro League players, and one of them was they increased attendance in the caliber of baseball. They were putting in ballparks that usually would seat maybe at the most 2,500. They were putting in 4,000, 5,000, 6,000. And when they played in the playoffs, well, 1949, Brantford and Galt played, and they dragged on trucks the seats, the stands from Brantford to Galt, and they sat in the outfield, way out in left field, on the other side of the fence. They sat down the first base and the third base line, and they were right on top of the play. and London drew for years. And you see, another thing that you got to understand about this particular league is it's all in southwestern Ontario. You can get to almost any place from any of the teams within an hour and a half. And some of the places are, 25, 30 minutes apart. So there's a natural rivalry, with Kitchener and Guelph, or Kitchener and Brantford, or Galt, so the rivalry was there. Plus, Canada's hockey. They were beating each other up on hockey rinks too. So they just drew a lot of people. And you got to remember, like after the war, 1940, 46, 47, 48. I mean, people were, that was the only place to go. Television wasn't even big at that time. So I think they just drew, and they had sponsors. I mean, but they put a lot of people in the ballpark.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. Paul, I'm from upstate New York, Rochester and so on. So pretty close to that, certainly closer than Virginia Beach, to that area. It's just, it amazes me that, well, first of all, do you have any estimate as to what the general population is of the area that encompassed, that this league encompassed? How big is Chatham? How big is London?
No, I don't think I could. I'd have to do some math to total it all up, but I can tell you that London is probably, when I was there, maybe 135,000.
Oh, okay.
When Mooney Gibson was there in the 18s, it was like 30,000. And when they won the World Series, I think the whole city came out at the train. Chatham is, when I was there, was 28, 30 in the 60s, and I think it's 44,000. Hamilton, of course, is a big city.
Yeah.
Toronto was millions, but Toronto didn't join the league till 1969. That was my first year. We won the championship that year with Toronto. But yeah, it's
but Toronto was in the International League a lot of those years also.
Yeah, I think it's a different. By the way, would you have known Tom Burgess?
Oh yeah, Tom Burgess. Tom Burgess was. I was just starting to get interested in baseball when Tom Burgess played for the Rochester Red Wings.
Yeah, well,
and he was my favorite player on the Red Wings during that part of my year.
Yeah, Tom Burgess was from London, Ontario. Played on that 1948 team that beat Fort Wayne, and played in the intercounty. Signed with the Hamilton Cardinals. Went through the Cardinal organization. Went up to AAA. Played at Rochester. I found out about him before I played for him. He managed me 1 year, from guys who lived in Rochester that came to Assumption University in Windsor because of the Basilian father connection. The schools in Rochester, there were a couple of Bishop McQuaid and some other schools, St. Thomas Aquinas, were Basilians, and the Basilians ran Assumption University. And when they knew that I played some baseball, they said, "Have you ever heard of Tom Burgess?" And I said, "No, I never have." He said, "Oh, hell." He says, "We call right field Burgess Field." He said, "He's probably one of the best that ever." And what happened with Burgess, as far as Major League Baseball, is that he had the unfortunate, let's say, birthday and timing to land up in the Cardinal organization when there was a guy by the name of Stan Musial.
Right.
And he was an outfielder, and he played a little bit of first base. And then also, he went up at the same time. Oh gosh, I'm having a senior moment. Who stayed with them? He got a bunch of hits, and Burgess didn't, and they kept him and sent him back. And he was probably a better known AAA ball player than he was a major league player. But years later, he spent a year and a half with the California Angels as a pitch hitter. Yeah, a great ball player. Yeah, for sure.
Well, what was it? It seems like the popularity and the devotion to quote, you've used the term in the book, semi-pro baseball. The devotion to baseball locally there was that devotion to local baseball, to town teams and so on, was greater than in other parts of the country. For example, growing up in Rochester, I never heard I mean, there were some semi-pro leagues in Rochester and so on, but you know, between Rochester and Buffalo, there's a whole bunch of smaller cities and towns, and yet baseball wouldn't have been supported like it was in southwestern Ontario.
Yeah, and that's because of several things. You know, why did the Negro League players come to Canada? Because Jackie Robinson and Campanella and Ernie Banks and Monty Irvin and, you know, Larry Doby, and, you know, these guys were now playing in the major leagues. There was more interest in seeing how those guys were doing than they were the Negro Leagues themselves. And I alluded to the financial problems. Some of the Negro League teams folded. They weren't drawing what they used to. And in the early period of this intercounty baseball league, there was nothing else. I mean, that was entertainment. You could bring your family, you could go to the ballpark, and you didn't pay a lot of money, and you watched a really good caliber baseball. I didn't play it for you, but I interviewed this guy Bobby Deacon, who I did refer that his back got broken when George Altman, who later played for the Cubs, tried to jump over him on a double play. And I interviewed Bobby. Bobby's like 87, 88. And he was expected to be a New York Yankee in the major leagues. There was no doubt about it. He could hit, he could field, and he never recovered. And he said to me, listen, the intercounty was damn good baseball. I made a chapter that way, damn good baseball. He said there were scouts there. There were guys that had been around. They played in various leagues. The Negro League, you know, the Negro League players are now by Major League Baseball considered to be Major League players.
Yeah,
they were good ball players, and the caliber of baseball was good. The rivalries were good, and hey, there wasn't a lot of television, so that's why they supported their. And it's just natural rivalry. I mean, my God, St. Thomas and London are 12 miles apart. You know, and Kitchener, Waterloo, and Guelph are all within 30 minutes of each other. So I think that's probably the reason why they supported that.
Anybody else?
Paul, how long did it take you to write the book?
I went to a couple baseball reunions in London and Brantford, and I think it was, let's see, 2019 would have been, yeah, that'd be 50 years from 1969 when we won the championship. So I would say 2019 I got the bug because I talked to these older guys and my older coach who I admired and respected, and I heard things. Plus, when I played, Andrew, I'd be sitting on the bench as a 21-year-old guy in the semi-pro league, and the older guys, like that guy from Quebec, Johnny Ambrose. Johnny would say, "Hey kid, see that fence out there in left field?" I say, "Yeah." "See the house on the other side of the fence?" "Yeah." "Well, the great Wilmer Fields, a Negro League player, hit it." "No kidding, really?" So I heard all these stories about these guys. So I started, I want to say 20, 21, something like that. And, you know, you're on and off, you research, you talk to people, you pull up newspaper articles. And I had some really good contacts at the University of Western Ontario, a lady in Brantford, a former Toronto Blue Jay scout out of Galt who had all kinds of memorabilia and programs and clippings and so meeting them, talking to them, doing FaceTime, making notes. That's it probably, the answer is probably a couple of years. Yeah. But I learned a lot. It was fun. I had no idea of some of these things that took place in this league.
That doesn't seem too long for 400 or over between 400 and 500 pages.
Well, when you're what do they say with Jerry Reed used to say, when you're hot, you're hot. When you're not, you're not. I never, you can see I can talk, so I probably can write the same way. You just get going, and you make a note, and then you write something, and then you find out something else, and then you go back to that note and you could paste it in. For example, the Saudi Groat story. All I knew about Saudi Groat was he was a native. He was born near Brantford on a reservation. He went to Buffalo. He played professional lacrosse, and he played pro baseball with SABR and with Major League Baseball and baseball data, newspapers. You can find out anything if you stick at it long enough. And I had no idea who Saudi Groat. Saudi Groat evidently was famous in your area as a ball player with a basket catch. The newspaper claimed that he caught below his waist a lot of time, and he was really fast. Well, who gets credit is Willie Mays for the basket catch. But Saudi Groat evidently is that way. And the same with you remember the catch that Willie Mays makes, the famous one with his back in the Polo Grounds, and it's off of Vic Wirtz from Cleveland. And he runs back, his hat falls off, he catches it over his head, turns around and throws it back in. Okay, that's on television. Jimmy Wilkes from the Newark Eagles that I played against for 1 year, Seabiscuit, he is alleged to have caught a ball in Yankee Stadium out by the monuments over his head that was the most sensational catch that anyone had ever seen or heard about in the Negro Leagues. Now, why don't we know about it? Because it wasn't covered. They don't write about it. He did, and like it's verified that they did these things. They made catches. I saw newspaper articles that Jimmy Wilkes, when he played for Newark in Shibe Park, made several sensational running catches and stuff like that. I can tell you a personal story about Jimmy Wilkes. When I played in 1963, I hit a ball between left and center field that I thought was going to be a stand-up double. And I'm running down the first base line, and the coach says, hold up, you're out. I said, out. I stopped, and I said, what do you mean out? He says, he caught it. I says, you're kidding. I went back to the dugout, didn't say anything. 3 or 4 innings later, did the same thing, left center field, good shot, running down the first base line. Coach says, oh, you're out. Out. I went back to the dugout, and I said to a black player, a really good friend of mine, has passed away now, Gabby Anderson, who played pro ball. I said, Gabby, who the hell is that guy out there? You know what he said? He said, he's an old horse who can still run, Paul. And Jimmy Wilkes also umpired for 23 years after he stopped playing baseball. And I was up the bat when Jimmy Wilkes was behind the plate, and he rung me out on an outside pitch. And I knew him. I respected him. I turned and I said, Jimmy, was that a good pitch? He said, I got a better look at it than you did. And I went back to the dugout and I said to Gabby Anderson again, I said, Gabby, I said, what do you think about that? He says, if Wilkes said it was a strike, it was a strike. What did he say to you? He said, I got a better look at it than you did. He said, son, he's trying to coach you. Keep your head on the ball, especially on the outside corners. So that's the kind of stuff that I tried to put in. I don't know how many of you got the book, but there's a little section that I squared in called the extra inning. And those are the stories that I heard. I heard stories about Jimmy Wilkes. I heard stories about Shanny Clifford. I heard stories about these various players. And some of them I knew. I knew some of those stories. I got picked off on first base one night against a guy that later played AAA ball, a great coach out of Ithaca College in New York by the name of George Valiceni. I got picked off. I came back to the dugout. I sat down. I looked over, and I happened to be sitting next to Johnny Ambrose, the former pro from Quebec, great ball player. And I said, damn, I thought he was coming home. He looked at me and he says, don't think, kid. You're just costing the team. So, those are the kind of things I tried to tell to make it more than just their batting average, stories about these great players. So it was fun, but worthwhile.
Well, we're getting on to an hour. Anybody else have any other questions? No. Paul, thank you very much for coming. Really appreciate it.
Oh,
Good
good.
presentation.
I enjoyed it, and as I say, grab a hold of the book and speak kindly of me, and maybe our paths will cross some other time. I'm hoping to get a shot at the national convention in Minneapolis, but that's you never know. You send a submission in and you say, hey, I'd like to do this, and it just depends. But I hopefully I would get a shot at that too. Anyway, but thanks a lot. I really appreciate you having me. Okay, bye bye.
Thank you.
Hi,
Have a
Paul.
good night.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you too for the the original contact, Andrew. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Okay, bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Drew, congratulations of making it just in time. I think he just left.
Yeah.
Oh well. Hey guys, everything okay? You got your electricity, Ray?
Yeah, it came out about 8:15.